Hello again, everyone. This is Stan Scott with Foggy Bottom Line Media. I wanted to do a really short video about a podcast I saw the other day by a gentleman named Auron McIntyre. He's a right-winger, MAGA adjacent. I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. But he was talking about sports betting, okay? And you've heard me talk about that a little bit, and I want to elaborate on some of that. But before I get started, I want to remind you to subscribe to the channel, comment, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but don't forget to subscribe. It's free, costs nothing, but it does support our work, and it'll make sure you get notified when new episodes or spot reports or other content drops. So Auron McIntyre is what I would describe as a Christian nationalist, at least Christian nationalist adjacent sort of podcaster, definitely very right-wing. He's one of these people who believes that if you're not a Christian, you should not be part of the populace, that is part of the political populace. So the only people who should have political rights are Christians. And it's not about agreeing with the American project, with American values like liberty and justice and free speech. It's the Christian values that make you a real American. And I'll elaborate on that in future shows because I've been watching some of his stuff to try to get a sense of what's going on in the minds of the other side. Because part of my project is to try to understand that and to see if we can find some sort of points of agreement or ways to talk to each other and sort of bridge some of these gaps. And in fact, I agreed with one of the things he said on this podcast because he talks about sports betting, as I said. And as you know, if you heard my other podcast on the subject, I come from, my father was a gambler. He was a bookie, an outlaw bookie, an illegal bookie back in Little Rock before he passed away. And he taught me to play cards early. I learned the gambling thing. I understand how to make football bets, how to make baseball bets. I understand casinos. I understand gambling, and I understand sports betting. And McIntyre is on with a guy named Jay Burden, who also has a podcast that's kind of interesting to watch. But they're talking about sports betting. And they actually said something that I agree with, and that is there's just too much of it. It's just too easy. And I mentioned that in a previous show myself, that, I'm all for gambling. I don't think gambling is a moral question. I don't think gambling is socially unacceptable. I don't think it's bad as entertainment. And if you go into a casino with your $100 or your $10,000 if you're that wealthy, and you think of it as a form of entertainment, I'm going to have fun tonight, winning or losing with this money. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with betting on a football game or a baseball game or a basketball game now and then if you're doing it for entertainment. And you're careful. You never bet money you can't afford to lose. So not rent money, not mortgage money, right? And you don't get addicted. And it's too easy to get addicted if you can gamble on anything from your phone. So I can sit there and place a football bet, and then 30 seconds later place a baseball bet, and 30 seconds later place another bet. And so before I know it, I'm on the thing 10 minutes, and I've got 13 different bets on different sports and on different outcomes. This is a problem. It's also a problem because you can upload money into these platforms very easily, right? Which means that if I lose the first couple of bets on Sunday, I can put some more money in and make some more. So we need some regulation on this, and Auron McIntyre agrees. The interesting thing is that McIntyre makes it a moral question, okay? And I'm going to play a little bit of a clip. It's a little bit long. It's a couple minutes long, but I'm going to play a clip of him talking about talking about sports betting and an encounter he had with a Republican state party chair who got really hot and went all libertarian on him, saying it's just the market. And what this brought to my mind is, well, if you oppose allowing sports gambling to be completely everywhere on moral grounds, and you think that some things should be pulled out of the market, then what about healthcare? And I'll talk about that here in a second after I play this clip. Listen to him. I don't have video. I've just got the audio. But listen to this little 2 and a half minutes from Auron McIntyre on sports gambling, and then I'll talk about it in a minute.
funny enough, I got into a knockdown dragout with a head of a Republican state party over this fact. Me and R. Reno, funny enough, were speaking at an event, and he had mentioned something about limitations on government, that kind of thing, and we both pointed out that things like legalizing drugs or having sports betting was ultimately deleterious to the kind of his state. And he got very hot and said, well, this is just freedom. This is the free market. Aren't we Republicans? Don't we believe in liberty? What are you talking about? Big government getting involved in all of this stuff. And of course, Reno, being kind of an arch Catholic, and myself being a arch Protestant Catholic, basically said, no, you like, obviously you have to involve the government. The civil magistrate has a duty to protect the people from vice. Like yes, as you point out here, in most
So the government has a duty to protect people, and in this case, from themselves, right? Government has a duty to make sure people don't do harm to themselves.
cultures, they understand that there is going to be some level of this, right? Like prostitution is going to exist, drugs are going to exist, gambling are going to exist, right? No one who isn't living in some kind of utopian fantasy believes these things simply don't exist. However, there is a lot of wisdom in heavily restricting the places they can exist. Now, some of these things can be entirely eliminated, some of them can't. And for the ones that can't, circumscribing them in a particular situation really saves a lot of people's lives, right? Like it really does change something in the mind, especially of the addict, of having something in their pocket ready to pick up the minute they can, as opposed to having to go to an undesirable place and engage in obviously socially, disliked behavior. And there's a barrier there. The fact that there just happens to not be that addiction right sitting at your hand does quite a bit. But as you say, there
So, so he's pro government regulation when it comes to sports betting and other gambling, other ways to gamble. Okay, and that regulation in his mind would it would look like basically restricting the places where you can gamble or place a bet on a sporting event. Okay, so in order to protect people from themselves, so far, you'll get into the moral thing here in a second. He thinks it's okay for government to regulate these kinds of businesses. Right now, he talks about socially undesirable behavior in bad places. Um, I can tell you the stigma is coming off of this. So I don't know about socially undesirable. I don't know about bad places. I've been in casinos that are pretty fancy, so I don't know about bad places. But this is where he starts talking about this from a moral standpoint. So listen.
say there's a conflict with this kind of libertarian form of economics saying, well, there, as long as it's a market transaction, it's fine. But for those of us who recognize that actually there are quite a number of things in the world that are sacred and should not be subject to the market forces, there are actually things that should not exist inside the marketplace. This is horrific. And just turning everything and saying, oh, well, ultimately it's just about the market. This is a terrible cop out. And especially for people, libertarians might be able to get away with this, but for conservatives who are supposed to pretend like they do care something about the moral fabric of the country, allowing this at scale, I mean, obviously the money is just too good for a lot of these people, but ultimately the fact that they can't find the wherewithal to take a moral stand seems to be a huge issue.
Okay, so government should regulate gambling and sports betting as a way to protect people. So government has an affirmative duty to protect people, if only from themselves. Government should regulate businesses in order to do this. Okay, not everything should be basically managed or regulated just by the free market. Okay, some things are sacred. Okay, in this case, addiction, stopping addiction, I guess, or the moral problems with gambling, because these two definitely see gambling as a moral failure. It's immoral to do this. They fortunately they understand you're never going to make it go away completely, but they see it as a moral issue and not just a market issue. And finally, the some things are just too important to be regulated by the market, right? This has to be looked at as one of these things that It impacts the moral fabric of the nation, and therefore should be regulated so that it doesn't get out of hand and hurt the moral fabric of the nation too much. Okay. My question then, after all this, is what about healthcare? Because the same people will argue that healthcare should be run by the markets. In fact, they would get rid of health insurance altogether and get people to just buy their healthcare out of pocket for everything. The idea being that competition would then reduce prices and make everything work out fine. It would deliver resources the way where they're supposed to be, and outcomes would be effectively managed by the free hand or by the invisible hand of the free market. Okay, but what about the moral aspects of this? Because you can't use markets to manage the effects of this on human life. Because if I need a procedure or a medication to live, to literally stay alive, how's the market going to regulate that? They can charge me anything I want, anything they want. And if I can't pay, I die. And this is what's happening. We have health insurance companies telling people we're not going to cover that. You're just going to have to die. Or we're telling, or pharmaceutical companies are telling people, yeah, that medication costs $10,000 a month. That's what it costs. That's what you're going to have to pay. And, you know, maybe this has something to do with what it costs to make it, what it costs to provide the service. And the idea with insurance, and especially with government, you know, universal health care, would be to spread these costs out so everyone can get the care they need. And everyone will eventually need that care. But back to the main point here, and this is what I would ask Auron McIntyre if I could talk to him personally. I would ask him, well, if gambling is such a problem that it destroys the moral fabric of the nation, why isn't healthcare and the fact that people go bankrupt when they get breast cancer or they get prostate cancer or they have a heart attack, or they need some other procedure, or their child is born with a congenital defect that needs a lot of money to fix? How does that impact the moral fabric of the nation when we allow these people to suffer needlessly? There's plenty of wealth around here, lots of money out there to cover all these folks and make sure everyone gets the health care they need, at least at a very basic level. So how is it that gambling is such a problem for the moral fabric of this country? Gambling addiction, drug addiction, he talks about that too. How is it that these are such a problem for the moral fabric of the country, but just letting people die or suffer because they don't have health insurance or can't get health care, how does that not impact the moral fabric of the country? How is that not a good reason for government regulation of the healthcare marketplace? But these people oppose the Affordable Care Act, which is a sideways regulation, but it's something. And it forced health insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions, like the young woman that got breast cancer, and they refused to cover the treatment, because she forgot to tell them that she had acne when she was 14 years old, when she signed up for the health insurance policy. This is a problem in this country. This health care thing is a problem in this country, and even conservatives are talking about it when Trump starts talking about how the Affordable Care Act subsidies just go to health insurance companies. Well, I'm okay with getting rid of them altogether. Let's just get rid of the health insurance companies, pass Medicare for all, and let's fix this problem. Other countries do it. They're not going broke. It actually saves money, and it would improve the moral fabric of this nation. This is Stan Scott with Foggy Bottom Line Media. Once again, subscribe. Let us know what you think. Reach out to me. We want feedback. Comment what you think in the comments, and I'll be on there visiting with you if anyone jumps on. To me, this is one of the most important failures of the American nation, is our complete failure to use the wealth we've produced to make sure that everyone in this country has a baseline health care opportunity, an opportunity to get a baseline of health care. And that includes dental and vision, by the way. This is Stan Scott with Foggy Bottom Line Media. Subscribe, like, share, and let us know what you think. I'm going to sign off, but Scott and I will be recording the Base podcast tomorrow morning. So you should see that on your feed on Thursday. Stan Scott signing off. Everybody have a good day.